What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. My name is Justin Boone, and yes, you were used to seeing Matt Harmon in this driver's seat, but Matt is out today, so I am in with my good friend, my new friend, Scott Pianowski. It is an exciting time here. I mean, we had the one-off Hall of Fame game last week, but this week to me feels like when football is truly back because we're going to see all 32 teams in action. Scott, how are you feeling about that? How are you feeling about preseason really getting underway now?
Yeah, I'm just juiced. I realize it's going to be a lot of backups, and it may not always be players we're drafting for fantasy, but it's football, it's tackling, it's points, and we just inch closer to the regular season. Now we have to do more reading. We have to do more, between the lines stuff. We have to color outside the lines a little bit more. You and I have been playing fantasy back in the day when starters, the ones would come out and they'd play half a game. We didn't like that first half. Let's play them the three quarters. Let's try to feel good about ourselves. Now it seems like everybody's the bubble wrap idea. This guy's valuable. Let's get him to opening day. Let's not show our hand to our opponents. That seems to be the motif that most teams follow. But there's a lot to figure out with the preseason, and just getting to the Hall of Fame for the Expo is going to be a blast. Seeing you in person, some other Yahoo colleagues is going to be a blast. And as we get, fantasy football is theoretical for such a long period of time, and we're getting closer and closer to it being a reality, to our teams mattering, to our teams counting, to us having an idea of what kind of season we're going to have. And just the fact that it becomes more of a real thing every day is very exciting to me.
Absolutely. Well, before we get too deep into the fantasy waters, a reminder to folks out there, Harmon has been telling you this nonstop, but don't forget, the pod is now live every day, Sunday to Thursday, on our brand new Yahoo Fantasy Football YouTube channel. So be sure to subscribe. We're going to have you covered there all through draft season this month, and then all the way through the season as well, leading right up to the fantasy championship weekends. Make sure you are hanging out with us over there. Now, Scott, for today's show, I want to put a bow on strategy week, which is what this has been labeled for the podcast this week. And we're going to do that by, I guess, kind of like showing our cards, so to speak, and just actually telling people who are the players that we're targeting in every round. So I want to go back and forth here. We'll go round by round, and we will name a player, or my guess is for some of these rounds, there's going to be multiple guys that we want to bring up. That's okay too. We're going to try to get these players in as many drafts as we can. That is the point of this today. I will also say that, and I don't know how you feel about this, Scott, but ADP data this time of year, it is a very difficult thing to pin down. If you look at different sources, they can vary wildly. So it is tough to kind of figure out exactly where players are going. You don't want to cheat and take ADPs where guys are clearly way off. Like, for example, somebody that I really like, Emeka Egbuka, his ADP on some sites is like the 11th round. And yet the drafts I'm in, I'm seeing him going like the 7th, 8th, 9th round. He's never falling to the 11th round at this point. So as we get further into August, those ADPs will start to tighten up and they'll look a little more like drafts will resemble kind of later this month. What we're going to do today is we're going to use Fantasy Pros Consensus ADP, which includes Yahoo ADP, also bakes in a few others. I think that's just a way to try to throw a big blanket over it and try to cover as wide of a range as possible. So that's the plan. Let's just dive in here, Scott. And I think it makes the most sense for you to take round one because you were on the show earlier this week. You and Harmon broke down round one. You went pick by pick. So you really went over it with a fine tooth comb. You know exactly who to take here. Who is your guy that you like in round one?
Yeah, and that was supposed to be a show about being negative, but we found it hard to do in round one because so many of these players are going to have monster seasons. It's the most defining pick that you will make. Now, I did not say Ja'Marr Chase only because, only one person in most leagues will get a chance at Ja'Marr Chase. He would be my number one pick. I just want to put that to the side. But my targeted player is Bijan Robinson. And specifically, I'm targeting him over Saquon Barkley off that 482 touch season, off that season where he averaged 29.4 yards per touchdown, didn't have a touchdown from the 1 yard line. That's Hurts territory. I want my players on the upswing, on the escalator. I want to draft players who haven't had their best season yet. I look at that NFC South. I see a lot of pinball scoring. Robinson can obviously play in all packages. I realize Tyler Algier will be on the field somewhat, but that's okay. And Zach Robinson, their offensive coordinator from the McVay tree, took him a while to get his feet wet. I realized part of that was Kirk Cousins' problems, limited player at this point of his career. I was really excited what Penix brought to the offense late last season. I know this won't be the last time we talk Falcons on this show. But Bijan Robinson, man, he's going to be a big part of my portfolio. I've seen some drafts I've been in where he's slid to the middle of the first round, maybe even the bottom half of that first fold of the first round, which I think is stealing. I would consider him as early as 2 or 3 overall. And again, I'm prepared to take him before Gibbs. I'm prepared to take him before Barkley. I'm just all in on Robinson for 25.
And it's not even a projection. Like last year, the last 13 weeks of the season, he was the highest scoring fantasy running back. Like he's already done it for a very long stretch. That's not even a small sample size. He finished with 12. He finished as a top 12 back 10 times during that stretch last year. 10 out of those 13 weeks, he was inside the top 12. He was an RB1. Now he gets the easiest fantasy schedule of any running back this year, according to my strength of schedule matrix. So barring injury, it is almost, I don't, knock on some wood here. It seems almost impossible for him to fail for fantasy this year. And I think, and you kind of alluded to it there, like that seems to be the case with the majority of first round picks. Like as long as they stay healthy, they're probably going to be fine. And that's the case more than any other round, right? You're sort of like handcuffed to your draft spot in the first round too, which I think makes it kind of tough for us to have this discussion about round one. And it's good that you didn't just go with Chase, sort of the low hanging fruit there, because if you're in the back half of round one, you're not going to have a chance at any of those guys. I often find when I'm picking late in the first round, I end up going with a receiver there. And then I wrap back around and take a running back in round two. And on that note, let's go to round two and talk about a couple players here. There's one guy that I'm focused on. I get in a lot of drafts, but if De'Von Achane falls to that early second round, and he sometimes goes in the late first, but if he falls to the early second round, I'm grabbing him there all day. I really love that ceiling that he offers. 22.4 PPR points per game with Tua in the lineup last year, 8.6 PPR points per game without him. But Achane, like I said, not always there in the second round, so I didn't want to pick him here. That's why the guy that I went with was Drake London. And you can sometimes get London in the very, very late second round. I have him on so many teams. I think I said my piece on the show about him when we did the Dynasty Startup takeaways from the mock draft that we did, but you're getting a 24-year-old receiver, a guy who finally got decent quarterback play last year, and then just went off the 5th most fantasy points at the position. He was behind only Chase, Jefferson, Amon-Ra, and Brian Thomas Jr. Incredible company to keep there. And you talked about it. You want guys who are ascending. I'm not sure we're at the top of the mountain yet with Drake London, because when the Falcons turned it over to Michael Penix Jr. in the final 3 games, London was tied for the most fantasy points among receivers during that 3-game stretch. And with Darnell Mooney banged up, and we don't really know what we're getting from Kyle Pitts. I know Penix is talking him up, saying, we're going to throw KP the ball a lot this year. Hopefully that happens. I still have Pitts on a bunch of dynasty teams. I would like to see him return some value. But Drake London is going to be near the top of the league in targets this year, if not the target leader. That was another thing that over that stretch with Penix, when he was in there, he led the league in targets during those 3 games. So you can get him in the mid-second round. You can get him in the late second round sometimes. I think he's a fantastic pick in that range.
Yeah, he is so approved by Yahoo. You're in on London. Matt Harmon, who is obviously all about receivers, is in on London, and the Falcons are in on London. You mentioned Penix, and you mentioned where London ranked in those 3 Penix games. I just want people to hear these stats, okay? 22 catches, 352 yards, 2 touchdowns, 39 targets. That was a 3-game sample of London and Penix. I realize there are a couple of overtime games in there, so that tilts the math a little bit. But the bottom line was Michael Penix came off the bus and said, where's Drake London? I'm throwing Drake London the ball on first down, second down, third down, tight window, open. It doesn't matter. Red zone. Drake London has the ability to dominate. Ascending arc players. We talked about the Falcons at defense. I don't trust. A team that's going to play mostly an indoor schedule. I think the NFC South is going to be a pinball division. So, I got to not invite you to my drafts or Harmon to my drafts, because we're going to be having a big argument, a big elbowing match. And God forbid if it's a salary cap league, we're going to be going to the moon for Drake London. And I think that's money and draft capital well spent. A player I'll just duck in here. I want to mention, I want my early picks to be on great offenses. Really simple, right? Who are the best offenses? Get players on those teams. What teams are concentrated with their targets and touches? The Bengals check all those boxes. Chase Brown pretty much never came off the field the second half of last year. Maybe that snap share goes down a little bit, but the Bengals can't stop anybody. Joe Burrow is an MVP candidate, and he's looking at three guys, two dynamite receivers and Chase Brown. That's what this offense is. It's a very tight group of guys that we know where the touchdowns and yards are going to come from. So if you can get Chase Brown in the third round, you've done well. His ADP for this exercise is 24. So if you and I were in a draft together, if you broke my heart with Drake London, I'd probably be happy to pivot to Chase Brown.
Yeah, and we're in a lot of analyst drafts, and it has broken my heart to watch him go like late second, even like sort of mid to late second. Like Chase Brown is rising draft boards, and all the quotes coming out of Bengals camp, it's just so positive about him, right? After what we saw last year, that he proved that he can handle a big workload. They get rid of Zach Moss this year. I know Taj Brooks is interesting as a backup, but he's not a guy that's going to come in and take massive volume away from Brown. So Brown is one of those guys that went from being sort of an upside pick in the third round to settling in amongst that group of, second round backs who could really produce first round value. And my shares where I got him in the third round, I'm very, very happy that I have him on a lot of those teams. I mean, for me, my favorite start for a long time, and I'm not getting this anymore, was grabbing one of the running backs early. So whether it is Bijan, or I'm not as down on Saquon Barkley as you are, or Gibbs, or even CMC, even Christian McCaffrey, coming back around in round 2, getting Drake London, and then grabbing Chase Brown in the third. That was my favorite start for the longest time. And yet now there's no way that you're really going to make that happen in most leagues. If you can still do it, good for you. All the power to you. But let's keep it moving here. Let's go into round 3. You are back on the clock. Who do you like here?
Yeah, a couple of guys I'm going to focus on. Now, I realize Ladd McConkey may not be for everybody because some of the news is moving in the wrong direction. The Chargers had an injury in the offensive line with Slater out for the year, it looks like, and they've added Keenan Allen, what's left of him, in his 30s. So, okay, fine. It's still a condensed target tree. And once McConkey and the Chargers kind of met each other and got cooking over the last half of the year, he produced at a 1,600-yard pace. Then he had a monster game. I think it was 197-2 in the playoff loss to Houston. And McConkey, you think of him because of his build. You think, oh, he's a slot receiver. And now Allen's there. What's going to go on there? Well, McConkey was actually outstanding as an X receiver, as an outside receiver last year. And I think he and Bowers were maybe a little bit screened coming into the NFL. They obviously had pedigree and people were excited about them, but Georgia didn't throw the ball that much. And I realized the Chargers may not throw the ball as much as some other teams, but McConkey to me is uncoverable. I think the genie's out of the bottle. He produced at an elite level in the second half of last year. That playoff game means something to me too. It's a football game. It's the most important football games of the year. Why shouldn't we count that as part of our strategy and evaluation and all that stuff? And the other player I'll mention here, because I'm usually not a vanity tight end guy, but George Kittle, he's typically a player who has to do it on efficiency. He doesn't get the volume some other players. He may not even get to 100 targets in some season, but Deebo Samuel's gone. I don't know when Brandon Ayuk's going to play. I do like Ricky Pearsall and I do like Jauan Jennings, but they've had uneven starts. We know Pearsall didn't play all of last year. Jennings has had kind of some stops and starts this summer with contract and injury issues. I think it's possible that this could be the year where Kittle gets a bump in volume. And even if he doesn't, his efficiency is so good. They finally got him going as a red zone guy last year. He's probably got the most distance scoring potential at the tight end position. And I think I like Brock Purdy more than most people do. We obviously like Kyle Shanahan. So generally not a vanity tight end guy, but Kittle makes a lot of sense to me. My priority pick, the first guy I'm looking to, is Ladd McConkey.
Now, I also like Brock Purdy. So you're talking to the right audience here. Yeah, Purdy, just that solid, like low-end QB1, has a very easy schedule this year. Doesn't have a bye week until week 14. So he's almost like a set it and forget it quarterback that you can just kind of drop in there. And you can get him so late that you can just load up at the other positions and your team looks pretty darn good at that point. And Purdy can give you decent enough quarterback play. He's not going to win you your league necessarily, but he's certainly not going to lose it for you. I love both those picks. I think it's hard to argue with either of those guys. I mean, on a per game basis last year, you said it, like the efficiency from Kittle. Everyone talks about Brock Bowers and Trey McBride and the seasons they had, but Kittle was the number 1 fantasy tight end last year in fantasy points per game. And you're getting him the cheapest of these elite tight ends or vanity tight ends, like you're calling them. So yeah, I really like him. And he's also someone, and I don't know if it's because of the injuries to the 49ers receiver core or what, but I feel like his ADP has slowly crept up. He was a little bit cheaper a month or so ago. And then now he's getting up kind of right close to where McBride is. He's starting to go a little earlier there in the third round. And then for McConkey, I mean, it's been such, mostly positive news around the Chargers all offseason. And then sure enough, as they get back in camp, now some things start to happen that could potentially impact him. It's nothing that's going to scare me away, right? Keenan Allen being there, this is not the same Keenan Allen. This is 33-year-old Keenan Allen. I think he's much more concerning for the other wide receivers that they have, and he could take volume away from those guys and from the tight ends. I don't think he's going to impact McConkey that much. McConkey's just such an awesome player. And, the injury, you mentioned it earlier, the Rashawn Slater injury. I haven't seen an update on this. If you have, correct me. We don't know for sure that it's going to be a season-ending injury, and I don't want to jump to conclusions because we saw a few weeks ago with Justin Fields that a guy could leave on a cart and everyone thinks the worst and they think he's out for the season, and then he ends up being okay and he still comes back and he's going to be fine. For Slater, though, some of the signs, I mean, him getting on the cart, the teammates coming around and showing him some love, the towel over the head, the way it was described, that all kind of points to potentially it being a long-term injury. And that would be awful because that offensive line, I think, was coming together. 3 first-round picks, arguably one of the best tackle duos in the league. They bring in Mekhi Becton for the interior of that line this year. I was pointing to that as something that was going to be a big strength, a reason that I like O'Marion Hampton so much. And yet now we're going to have to see what happens with Slater. It'll be awful if they lose him for the season, though, Scott.
One other thing I have to mention, McConkey has missed a fair amount of practice time himself with an undisclosed injury. I'm not at the point of my panic level on that is still extremely low, and I haven't moved McConkey down in my rankings. But there comes a point, if that seeps into the middle of August, I'll have to address that and maybe change my strategy. But that's not, I just want to, notify everybody that that's something we have to monitor. And Harbaugh is not one of those coaches who gives us, most teams don't want to tell you a lot about injuries. I think Mike Tomlin is one of the more forthright guys. I mean, with Bill Belichick, you were lucky that he could see there was a game on Sunday, right? And let alone his injury report where he had 47 guys listed as questionable week over week. But just keep an eye on McConkey. I'm not concerned about it right now, but that's something that I may address later in the month if this trend continues.
Before we move on to the fourth round, I got to ask, how do you feel about the elite quarterbacks going in the third round? Because I think a lot of times they do go off the board in this round, talking about Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels as well. I've found myself taking a lot of those guys. I like just kind of locking down that position and knowing that they can give you a multi-point advantage, over the course of the season per week. Do you find yourself taking those guys at all? You said you're not necessarily a vanity tight end guy, but are you a vanity or elite quarterback guy?
I'm thinking long and hard about Lamar Jackson. My rule of thumb is once you stop taking running backs and receivers that you cannot wait to draft, it's your turn. You're on the clock and you just want to pound that draft button. You want to get everybody else going. You're so excited that the player you've been targeting has landed to you. Once I stop that tingly feeling, then I'm like, well, this position's getting flat. This receiver, Matt has talked a lot about the receiver position looking flat. He's going to pass, partially because Matt is so good with wide receiver analysis. And this is something you do with your draft strategy. Matt's really good at receivers. So he wants to leave some slots open to take those guys later in his draft. When that third round starts to get a little bit hairy, it's really tempting for me to take Lamar Jackson because we know the quarterbacks score the most points. Of course, what matters is how many more points they score, the delta against the other people that people are starting. That's the other reason for vanity tight end. Remember those years where Kelsey would be the number 1 tight end, and the difference between tight end 1 and tight end 2 was the same as tight end 2 and tight end 27 or something like that. That wasn't that uncommon a few years ago. Every year, of course, is different. But generally speaking, I wouldn't be a vanity quarterback guy. But once that third round gets a little bit hairy, once I'm no longer excited about the running back and receiver pool, I don't know if I'd go for Allen. It depends, and maybe you can sell me on some of his receivers later on this show. I'm a little bit nervous about Shakir being hurt. It blows my mind that he won an MVP. Top touchdown catch guy on the team was Mac Hollins with 5 touchdowns. It just shows you how much Superman was in Josh Allen's game last year. But I'm thinking long and hard about Lamar Jackson being my pivot the moment those other 2 positional pools start to look flat.
It's also funny, too. I've been in a lot of drafts where as soon as one of them goes, the next 3 picks, it's just boom, boom, boom. It's Lamar.
They're dog whistles. It's a dog whistle
then,
pick. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. As soon as they go, everyone panics and goes, oh my God, I got to jump in there. If you see them go a little bit later, it tends to be the same way. Just as soon as one goes, boom, they're all off the board there. Jumping over now to round 4. And for me, this is probably the first risky guy that I'm going to mention, but I am going with Kenneth Walker here on the Seahawks. And this coaching staff came in, Mike McDonald came in and just loved him up. It just nothing but positive vibes around Kenneth Walker, talking about the kind of back that he can be, that he can get involved in the passing game, that they think he can be this 3-down workhorse player. And I think a lot of people in the fantasy community last year were questioning that, right? Can he actually? He deals with injuries a lot. He didn't really have that pass catching profile coming out in college, but they wanted him to be the engine of this offense. And last year he comes out in week 1, has over 100 yards and a score. Then he gets hurt. First game back after missing a couple games with injury, over 100 scrimmage yards, 3 touchdowns in that game. And he stayed healthy to his credit for 9 games before he got hurt again. But even in PPR leagues last year, he was still the RB12 in fantasy points per game. He has that ceiling. He has that RB1 potential. He just needs to stay healthy. And unfortunately, I don't want to compare it to like a J.K. Dobbins situation, but we're getting to the point where if we have another season here where Walker gets hurt and misses time, we're going to have to start to question if he can be that guy. And I wonder if at that point the Seahawks would start to question it. But just because we haven't seen a player, show that he can be healthy for a full season doesn't mean they can't do it. A lot of the injury analysts always remind us of that. And I'm hoping that Walker can put it together. Now, it doesn't help that he was dealing with a foot injury in training camp and he had to miss some games. And again, that's just stuck in your mind like, oh no, hurt again. Zach Charbonnet's waiting there. He's just waiting for that opportunity. And it's one of the rare situations where we know if Walker's out, Charbonnet steps in and he's basically a top 12 running back for fantasy. But I thought it was really interesting to see last year Walker showing that he had the pass catching chops. He averaged over 4 catches per game. That was huge. If you put that average over the full year, he would have been second among running backs in receptions last year, which I don't think anybody would have thought Kenneth Walker could be that kind of player. And yet he has that in his bag. So for me, it's just a matter of can he stay healthy? And when we get to the 4th round, that's when I'm willing to kind of take a little bit of risk on. Those first few rounds, I want to make sure I'm getting guys that, of course, they have to have that elite potential, but you kind of want to just not miss in those first 3 rounds. Once you get to the 4th round, you got a few players, you got your core. Now I'm willing to take a chance on a guy like Walker. What do you think? Am I crazy to dip into this Walker scenario and risk that he's just going to get hurt on me again?
I mean, I think it's important to realize, and you kind of outlined this, that in the 4th round, floor doesn't really exist anymore. If these players had floor, they'd be 2nd and 3rd round picks. So you're swinging for the fences. You're looking for upside. A lot of moving parts of this offense. New coordinator, Kubiak. New quarterback, Sam Darnold. They've repainted the wide receiver room. JSN is still there, but the guys behind him are new players. And I don't know what Cooper Kupp's going to do. I can't believe MVS is still ostensibly a starter for an NFL team these days, but here we are. So it makes me a little bit nervous. Also, if you're going to draft Walker, it comes to how do you feel about Zach Charbonnet? What's the true talent difference between these two guys? Could Charbonnet ever win the game, win the job on talent, impress the new coordinator Kubiak, or maybe Walker's just too big to fail? You like him more than I do, but I mean, look, Justin, when you came over here, I mean, your Fantasy Pros trophies, I can see you in the background. I mean, they speak for themselves. You're a rankings god. Harmon and I have said it. And so whenever we disagree, I know I have to go back at my argument and see if I'm missing something. I think Walker's a little bit more risky than I'm willing to take on in round 4, understanding that's a risky round. I see somebody, I know that helium's getting a little bit crazy with the Marion Hampton. He's 39th on the ADP we're using for this exercise. If faced with Hampton or Walker, I think I might go with Hampton. And if you think that's crazy, you can tell me. But I also see when Kenneth Walker's been healthy, he's shown the potential to be a top 7, top 8 fantasy back. And if you knew that he was going to get through mostly a full season, and we're coming off a year where running backs generally didn't get hurt with just a couple of rare examples, I mean, I certainly see the upside that you're going for. And Kubiak, we like him to design a good running game. I mean, everything fell apart last year with the Saints, although Kamara still had a good year. I can't really hold that against Kubiak. His entire offensive line got hurt, it felt like at one point. So I see the upside you're going for. And in the 4th round, really, upside should be the determining factor in why you make your pick.
Well, you asked about the Hampton Walker thing. I'm certainly in on Hampton. I'm going to do a rankings update tonight before I'm out for the weekend. And right now, Hampton is still that guy for me. I'm taking him. I would be taking him in the 3rd round. I would certainly take him over Walker. But going to have to take a look and see what kind of information we get about the Rashawn Slater injury and how much that could impact the run game there. So everybody will be able to check out my updated rankings tomorrow at Yahoo. The last thing I'll say on Walker too is it almost reminds me a little bit of the James Conner situation, where when he's out there, he's like a top 15 back. You just kind of know he's probably going to miss 3 or 4 games in a season, and that's okay. And maybe it's just me being overconfident, but I feel like I'm going to be able to find replacements those weeks, and I'll know that he's going to give me meaningful production when he's on the field. I'm kind of approaching Walker the same way, that if he's not out there, I'll figure it out. But when he's out there, he's an automatic start and a guy that has that really high-end upside. Now, that is it for the first 4 rounds. Those are the easy ones, though, right? It's going to get a little more interesting as we go along here. So stick around. You will get to find out who Scott and I are taking in as many drafts as we can in the middle rounds. We'll be back after this. And we are back. Scott, we have made it to the 5th round. I think this is the area where you can actually win your draft. Hitting on the right players in this range, that's what can propel you to a fantasy title. Everybody's team after the first 3 or 4 rounds, they all look pretty good. There's still a ton of great names on the board here once we get to the 5th round. Who do you like in the 5th here, Scott? Who's your guy?
Yeah, DeVonta Smith jumped out to me because I see a player who's built a really sturdy floor, between 800 and 1,100 yards every season, decent touchdown equity. Last year he only played 13 games, so it held his counting stats down a little bit. Now you say, well, wait a minute. Philadelphia wants to run the ball. Look at their pass rate over expected. It's one of the bottom of the league. But that's with everything going right last year, with the defense playing an elite level. They win the Super Bowl, for crying out loud. Best team in football. They lost 1 game after their bye week. What if anything slips, where the defense, they have injuries or they have underperformance, or Barkley were to get hurt or something like that? If this team has to throw at even like a normal rate, then there's so much upside for a passing game that is incredibly condensed. It's A.J. Brown. It's DeVonta Smith. I've kind of given up on Dallas Goedert ever being an upside player. There's no major receivers pushing the top 2 guys. So I feel like you draft DeVonta Smith, and what he's expected to do will line up in the 5th round. Maybe you make your par. And if they have to tilt the offense a little bit more towards a normal offense and not such a run-dominant offense, then you have all that latent upside that could kick in. So to me, I talked about, once you get into those 4th, 5th rounds, you're not getting a lot of floor. I think Smith actually has a ton of floor, and maybe there's more floor driving this pick. But if this guy could play 15 or 16 games, and they're even like 18th in pass rate over expected, that's somewhere close to the average because of the way football is. The snow globe league, there's so much in the future we can never know right now. Man, then it's wheels up. So DeVonta Smith is just a good football player, and he's been extremely reliable for 4 years, and I'm happy to roster him if I can get him in the 5th round, and I hope it sticks. You talked about a lot of those builds you were getting that you can't get anymore. That's why I think drafting early is a little bit underrated. Yes, you take on more injury risk, but sometimes there are inefficiencies in the market you can take advantage of. I don't know if the Smith ADP will stick. I think it will, but right now it's a 5th round punch that I'm happy to make.
Yeah, it seems kind of strange given how consistent he's been, right? Wide receiver 17 in fantasy points per game last year, wide receiver 21 in 2023, wide receiver 14 in 2022. And yet his ADP has him as like wide receiver 24 or later, depending where you're looking. I don't get it. I do think he's a steal here. And if A.J. Brown misses any time, and A.J. Brown, little banged up here in training camp, maybe that's just a veteran taking some time off and, nursing an injury a little bit more so that he gets some time off during those hard days in the summer. But if we saw A.J. Brown go down at any point, oh my God, then Smith would be guaranteed to be a wide receiver 1 for fantasy. And despite the fact that I think some people are worried about this Eagles offense, I'm not. Like, I think they're going to be okay. I almost think like they're too big to fail. Like, I think this team just is so concentrated in that attack. All these players are stars. Smith, a very overqualified wide receiver 2 on that team, and a guy that can almost guaranteed give you wide receiver 2 production in fantasy week in and week out with some spike weeks in there. It's one that I just don't understand. I don't know if there's any others in this round that you feel the same way about, but Smith is one that stands out to me. And this kind of whole range, these next few rounds, we're going to talk about a bunch of receivers, and I've mentioned it on the show before. This whole range in these next few rounds are very wide receiver heavy for me in my drafts because I love so many guys that are going in this area.
Yeah, me too. It's no surprise. I think the next 3 rounds, you and I are going to be talking up receivers. So maybe we're spending too much time with Harmon, but it's a good time. And also, I'm curious, what has been your preferred build? Have you been a hero, zero RB, hero RB? In my leagues that start 3 receivers, I like to dominate the receiver room. I realize a lot of these strategies work in concert with each other. Have you been gravitating towards a certain build in your early drafts?
So normally it's been hero RB for me in the past for several years. This year, I'm finding that I'm normally grabbing 2 running backs a little earlier than I used to. Like by the 4th round, 5th round at the latest, I want 2 backs. I feel like it drops off a cliff pretty quickly once you get to like RB 20 or so. And I don't feel good about the guys that are going in that range. There's a few players that are interesting that could potentially come on, some of the younger guys. But overall, I want 2 of those top 20 backs to feel good about my roster. I don't feel as confident about hitting on those later backs this year. How about you?
Yeah, I think we're in the same mindset there. I'm going to start with I'm going to at least be hero, where I'm going to have that one guy I can hang my hat on. And then I'm going to hope in the 4th or 5th round, I find a second running back who looks really good, who's going to basically start himself. And again, stepping into some of that depth, some of the, again, these rounds we're talking about, the next few players we're going to mention are all receivers. There's so many guys who are just jumping out as screaming values. So I feel like that's where the value has taken us. And I realize it's a little bit just odd. I mentioned earlier, nobody got hurt last year at running back other than Christian McCaffrey and a couple other guys. And I realized McCaffrey was a major sting. He was the number 1 overall consensus pick, and that's no fun for anybody. But so that kind of colors our analysis a little bit. All those running backs changed teams. Barkley was a monster. Henry was a monster. Jacobs was a monster. Running backs going into better situations and all that. But man, I can't believe the receiver you're going to mention next round and the receiver I'm going to mention in round 7. I don't know if these prices are going to last, but I'd like to lock in these next 2 picks on all my teams right now. Let's just say that.
All right, I want to stick with receiver. Before we get to those rounds, though, I want to mention one more receiver in this round, and his ADP has fallen quite a bit, but it's Rashee Rice. Where do you stand on Rice? Like for me, I am still happy to take him in this range, even though we don't know what's going to happen suspension-wise. We don't know how long that's potentially going to be. And I hope that it's not me. It's not hubris. It's not me being overconfident that I can fill in the early part of the season before bye weeks go. But if he gets suspended for 2 to 4 games, 2 to 6 games, then if you get 5 or 6, then it starts to become more of a concern. But if it's 4 games or less, I would be happy to have him in this area and stash him on my bench and find somebody that I can throw in there because there are so many receivers coming up in the next few rounds. You can find a guy that you could play early in the season. And I think when Rice comes back, he's shown enough between the start last year, between all the reports that were coming out with, him in OTAs and in camp, just dominating targets. Looks like he is that number 1 guy in that passing attack. He's somebody that I'm taking the discount on him. How about you?
I'm certainly sold on the talent. Drew Davenport had to be confident that Rice was probably going to get through a full season last year as far as the suspension went. And I thought Rice was showing league-winning talent before he got hurt, obviously, early in the season. That stung because I feel like we made the right pick, and I give Drew all the credit for that. But we had an unlucky run out with an injury that nobody could have seen coming. But the thing with Rice is that my stance on him is going to depend on the room that I'm in. And the more competitive my league is, I think the less likely I would be to take Rice. If a league is a little bit more casual, if maybe everybody isn't pounding the waiver wire week in and week out, and I'd be more confident that my fill-ins would be of a higher quality. I'd be more likely just to dream of what that superstar lineup could be once Rice comes back from whatever the suspension is. In that situation, in that context, I'd be more likely to wait and see on Rice. It depends on the quality of my competition and how confident I am I'll be backfilling when he's not available.
All right, let's move on to round 6. And you already spoiled it here. It's going to be a receiver for me. And it's similar to your last pick. It's another overqualified number 2 guy. And maybe we've talked about Harmon's impact on us. And I will say, I know that he loves this player. And over the last month, I have continued to move this guy up in my rankings. It's George Pickens on the Cowboys now. One of the few smart moves that the Cowboys have made in the last year or two roster-wise. And he goes from this, I would say, unhappy situation in Pittsburgh where he dealt with a lot of bad quarterback play, but seemed to continuously produce through it. Didn't hit his ceiling necessarily, but still was putting up pretty good numbers out there. To now he's in Dallas. gets the best quarterback of his career in Dak Prescott, goes to an offense where they're going to throw the ball a lot more. And that's part of the thing fantasy-wise with him, where he's not going to be the number one receiver on the team any longer, but the targets might not drop off because he's going to an offense where they're going to throw the ball a lot. And there's not really another option there in that passing attack. I'm not a big Jake Ferguson guy. It sounds like, by all accounts, they love Pickens. They love what he's doing. He's opening up that passing attack for them by giving them another real option, another real weapon in the passing game, a guy they can look to downfield, can make those big splash plays. And I think what we're going to see in Dallas this year is going to be closer to what Dallas had a couple years ago, right? And Schottenheimer was the offensive coordinator at that point. But you look back a couple seasons ago, the defense wasn't quite as good. They had to throw the ball a ton, right? Dak was just chucking the ball. They were leading the league led the league in passing touchdowns and completions. They were top 5 in pass yards and pass attempts. And that was because the defense couldn't hold it down for them, and they had to just completely open it up. The backfield, I don't think, is going to be that interesting. I've said it before. I'm not really investing that much in this backfield. Jaden Blue, it looked like he got an injury today. We'll see how serious that is. Maybe he'll miss a little bit of practice time. Hopefully he doesn't miss any time in the season. But even if Jaden Blue's the guy that gets out there the most, he kind of profiles as like that pass catching back. So he could actually help Dak in the passing game more. This offense could be quick. I just think that Pickens is going to have an opportunity to still put up really, really good stats on an offense that is going to have to pass the ball a ton. And I think the fact, and sometimes maybe we don't incorporate this enough into our analysis because it is a little bit of a narrative, but I think he's really excited. I think he has the kind of personality. I've been a big George Pickens fan for a while. I think he has the personality where he was getting disgruntled in Pittsburgh. Now he goes to Dallas. He's got the star on the helmet. I think he's excited. I think he's fired up to prove himself. And I think it's going to result in a really good season. And to get him in this range where he can be your wide receiver 3 on your fantasy squad, that is an amazing pick in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, what really is the difference between T. Higgins and George Pickens, right? They're both on teams that are going to probably throw the ball over the yard. The receivers after those top 2 in both cities, very thin. I might like Jake Ferguson maybe a little bit more than you do, but I look at the Dallas receivers after Lamb and Pickens, and it's just a whole lot of nothing there. I don't believe in the backfield, and I think the defense, not only do I think it's going to be mediocre, I think there's lookout below potential for that defense. I think they could be a lot like the Bengals, where it's you better score 35, you're not winning today. And we've seen Dak, he was an MVP candidate 2 years ago. We've seen him carry an offense. We've seen him be good to his top receivers, his top targets, and there's stackability there. Me and my friend Chris, who are a really good fantasy player, we're talking about who are some of the maybe sneakier stacks, not obvious stacks. And we're thinking, well, how about Dak with one of his receivers? You have to have a certain draft capital or draft slot to get Lamb, but Pickens is going to be available. I can't believe this price is here. I think it may be gone by the end of draft season, but man, as long as you can get it in round 6, I think that's great. If I don't get Pickens, one guy I may look at is Calvin Ridley. Cam Ward, I think is going to be good right out of the box. Now, let's be realistic. Probably won't be C.J. Stroud 2 years ago. He certainly won't be what Jaden Daniels was last year. That's out of the range of outcomes to me, but it's a narrow, very narrow target tree. And I don't know what's left to Tyler Lockett. I think Tony Pollard's a good player, but not a great player. People have differing opinions on him. Maybe it takes a while for Ridley to get up to speed because Ward might need some time to get the training wheels off. But by the end of the season, I think Calvin Ridley's going to have 140 targets. He did it last year with very bad quarterback play. This year, I think they at least get competent quarterback play. I think Callahan's a decent pass game coordinator. So Calvin Ridley, kind of the boring veteran. He doesn't have the ceiling of Pickens. I'd certainly prefer Pickens, but he's a good plan B for me in round 6.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. He has to get the volume. They do not have much else in that passing attack there. I like Chigakonkwo, the tight end. I think he could be maybe a surprising fantasy play this year, but I'm not really interested in any of those other receivers that they have in Tennessee. So yeah, Ridley's going to get a lot of work there. I do have another receiver I want to mention here before we move on, and that's Travis Hunter. He tends to go in this range, and he's more of like a Pickens style guy where I'm not expecting him to get 10 targets a game, but certainly somebody that has big time touchdown upside, big play upside. And if you can get him as your wide receiver 3 or flex option where he goes in this range, I'm more than happy to do that and take that chance that Hunter's going to be a player that you want on your team, that he's going to be this exciting, Shohei Ohtani type guy who's going to come in here. And yes, he'll play a little bit on defense, but the way Liam Cohen's talking even recently saying like maybe he's going to play 80% of the snaps on offense, that would be enough in my mind for Hunter to pay off for fantasy.
And I mean, look what Liam Cohen did. He coaxed 41 touchdowns out of Baker Mayfield. I think most people thought that Trevor Lawrence had a higher upside coming in the NFL than Baker Mayfield did. We haven't seen it really with Lawrence, though he's had flirting, years here and there. He actually will run a little bit too. The Jaguars are going to be a fun team. I'm a huge Brian Thomas guy. We have to figure out their backfield, and getting that backfield right might be the most important thing we do there. But yeah, they don't have also, and Brenton Strange is okay, but they basically, it's going to be the Hunter show and it's going to be the Thomas show. And if Liam Cohen is the guy we think he is, what a fun offense that's going to be.
Agreed. All right, moving on to round 7 here, and we're going to keep the receiver theme going, I think this fits perfectly with what I said earlier, the idea that you can wait a little bit on receiver. I like to normally grab at least one high-end receiver, and then I'm okay waiting because I really think you can fill out the rest of your receiver spots and potentially your flex spot all in these rounds here. You got another guy that you're going to talk about here is someone that I'm happy to target in this range. Who is it, Scott?
Yeah, this is another get it while you can, because I'm not sure how much longer. He just snuck into the 7th round for this exercise. He may be a round 6, round 5 guy as we move deeper into draft season. It's Jaylen Waddle in Miami. And I look at last year, everything collapsed. The offensive line collapsed. Tua got hurt. When they came back, they didn't want to do deep drops. I mean, the fact that Tyreek Hill did not have a reception over 30 yards after week 1 is just a mind-blowing stat to me. And I look at Hill, right? In his 30s, didn't make the Pro Bowl last year. 1 minute he's happy in Miami, 1 minute he's not happy in Miami. I wouldn't be shocked if they got off to a losing record and he made a beef about maybe wanting a trade. The NFL actually makes trades in season. For a long time, it was almost the trade deadline was just a big dud in the NFL, but they moved it back. Teams aren't afraid to do things. So I don't even know if Tyreek Hill lasts the year in Miami. They lost Jonnu Smith, who the offense, the shape it became last year was really good for Jonnu Smith. He had a career season I don't think anybody saw coming. A lot of those targets are going to go to Waddle, another concentrated offense. I think he's here all season. I'm not sure Hill will be. I'm fading Tyreek Hill, and I'm putting all that energy in the fade into Jaylen Waddle. I cannot believe for this exercise he's in round 7 because honestly, Boone, as his ADP rises, I'll consider him in the 5th round. I'll certainly consider him in round 6. I think he's maybe the screaming value of the top 7 rounds so far. I think Jaylen Waddle has just been mispriced all summer.
Yeah, he's somebody that like every time I go to update the rankings, and we'll see when I work on them tonight if it's the same, but every time I update the rankings, I want to move him up. And I would say something similar about Rome Odunze with the Bears. They're guys that are number 2 receivers on their teams, but they're guys that actually do have a chance, I think, to unseat the number 1 receivers on their teams. And I wouldn't say that about the last 2 guys that we spoke about, right? About DeVonta Smith, about George Pickens, even though I think they're good picks as well. But it wouldn't shock me at all if we see Odunze and Waddle end up being the top receivers on their squads this year. And in this range, you're not really taking that much of a risk by drafting them. And if you do hit on that outcome, it could totally change your season. And I agree with what you said about Tyreek, that going back to like the George Pickens thing, it just seems like Tyreek is kind of unhappy there. He's always, said some silly things and whatnot, but it seems like things could go off the rails this season in Miami. And I agree with you that there's a path here where he definitely could end up on another team before the end of the year. And you look at Waddle, like, do people forget that he had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons? That he's 1 year removed from a 1,300-yard, 8-touchdown campaign. Like, he showed it to us before. So if that opportunity arises where he gets a chance to unseat Tyreek, and if the decline for Tyreek is real, which it seems like you feel like it is, yeah, I think Waddle is a great pick in this range here. And let's keep the wide receiver party just going. One more round. We will do it again. I'm going to talk about 2 more wideouts here. And it's the 49ers wideouts that you alluded to earlier that you talked about, Jauan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall. And sadly, I'm not talking about Brandon Ayuk. And that's because we don't know when Ayuk's coming back. It seems like he's going to miss the start of the year. He's coming back from a torn ACL and MCL that happened last October. That's a scary injury. That's a serious injury. What is he going to look like when he comes back? Is he going to be himself? Is he at risk of aggravating the injury when he comes back, or, potentially missing more time? Those are all concerns I have about a player when they're coming off of not just the ACL, but also the MCL. And I think this opens up the door for someone else to step in. And to me, Jennings showed that he can be that guy last year In the 8 games where he played at least 70% of the snaps, he averaged 87 yards per game, scored 6 touchdowns in those 8 games. Now, he's dealing with a calf injury. We don't know. He's sidelined at the moment. I'm not so sure that this calf injury isn't another one of these like business decisions that a lot of players are making right now, where they show up to the team, they want a new contract, and they're sort of finding reasons to not practice. Kyle Shanahan got asked about it by reporters, and his answer, like, he kind of tossed it back at Jennings to say, like, you'll have to ask him about it. And it seemed like he kind of made a comment like, you know, all these calves, we really got to watch over them or something. Like, I don't know. I feel like the team might be hinting at the fact that they're trying to figure out the contract situation, and when that gets sorted, Jennings might be back out there. I could be wrong. That's me trying to read the tea leaves. Maybe this is an injury that could keep him out, but we also have a month before the season. So if he's dealing with something, hopefully he'll be back for week 1 and we'll be fine out there. And if not, and even if he is out there, Ricky Pearsall apparently is looking quite good in practice, is establishing that connection with Brock Purdy. And you look back to last year, like, he missed the part early in the season where he got shot and still came back and played. In the 7 games, though, where he saw at least 4 targets, he averaged 56 yards and almost half a touchdown per game. So he's shown a little bit there. I think now he's going to come into this season and prove kind of why the 49ers invested in him the way they did. And this just isn't the 49ers receiving core that people are used to, right? Deebo Samuel's gone. Ayuk is out of the picture for who knows how long. And we both like Brock Purdy, like we said earlier. I know CMC's there. I know Kittle's there. But I think these receivers are going to be able to step up and put up some good stats, and I'd be willing to take either of them in this range.
Yeah, they're both targets of mine too. Jennings, when he had that breakout game, I think it was against the Rams, the 3-touchdown game. I rewatched it on the coach's tape. And look, I am not a scout. I am not a professional offensive coordinator, but I've been around football for long enough, and I was just impressed at how he was able to not just get separation, but to win contested catches, make yards after the catch. He was very physical. Remember, he got that pretty good contract for a non-starter because they liked his competition level. They liked his blocking ability. And then he showed his ability to be a better receiver and be more impactful on the outside than they expected all along. So I'm curious how you come down on this. If faced with both of these guys, I would take Jennings first. I'm certainly not taking Ayuk. He's essentially not on my board. I just don't like drafting into injured players who still command a pretty healthy ADP. If you were on the clock and both of them were available, which way are you leaning?
I really want to pay close attention to figure out what's going on with the calf. If the calf is fine, then it's Jennings for me. If he continues to sit out and we start to worry that the injury is legit or that maybe he will miss time at the beginning of the season, I'd be okay taking Pearsall. I have them both very, very close in my rankings, though. And like I said, I won't feel bad about getting either of those guys. But yeah, if everyone's healthy, if everything's equal, I would be going with Jennings. That's the way that I had it ranked for a very long time until this calf injury and the contract situation and everything popped up there. And then it becomes a little more of a concern, but we'll see. We got one more break here to go, and then we are going to get into our favorite picks in the later rounds when we get back right after this. All right, Scott, 4 more rounds to go here, 2 rounds each. And when you get to the later rounds, I'm almost always shooting for upside. I mean, we talked about it after the early rounds. You kind of want to start to lean upside. When you get to the later rounds, you want these guys to be able to potentially crack your lineup. And if they can't, you want to find that out very quickly, and you want to be able to cycle them out for waiver wire ads that maybe could potentially crack your starting lineup. So, Scott, you've highlighted 2 players in round 9 here that I am absolutely drafting everywhere. Let everybody know who they are. The floor is yours.
Yeah, you're so right about that. Upside, this part of the draft. That's the only thing we're looking at. NFC North, best division in football. How about Jordan Mason in Minnesota? Now, granted, look, this breaks my rule of in the summer, I try to be very careful when they say happy things with quotes. And whenever they tell you something negative, I believe that stuff. But the Vikings are talking up Jordan Mason. Like, he's basically almost like a co-chair in the backfield with Aaron Jones, a guy who's been around the league for a while, taken his share of hits, usually needs time off week in, week out. I think the only reason the Niners let Mason go is because they had such good depth and they liked Durendo a lot. But Jordan Mason, when he was asked to play last year, was an impactful player. Maybe there's a run-heavy concentration in this offense. They try to get J.J. McCarthy. up to speed. The Mason round 9 pick is a little bit more like Waddle. Get it while you can. He's a kind of a buzzy player in the industry. I think his ADP is only going to rise. So if you're in a draft this weekend or sometime now, it might be a good chance to get a price you like because it may be unavailable later in the month. But I think he could win if Mason gets hurt. I'm sorry, if Jones gets hurt, Mason wins for you. I think Mason could take over the job. He's younger, fresher legs, could be more impactful, could be more exciting, more explosive in this offense. So somebody who we're always looking for backs who maybe we're not starting on opening day, but could be a set and forget piece later in the season. And Jordan Mason has all of those feels for me. Now, Green Bay, since they let go of DeVonta Adams, nobody's gotten past 100 targets. I think maybe Lazard or somebody like that had 100 exactly, but that's the cap. They rotate their receivers. Last year, they went from an average pass rate over expected to they went to like 29th, I want to say. Maybe that was Jordan Love being hurt. But what they did that was really exciting was get Tucker Kraft going, splash plays, really high yards per catch for a tight end, and he had a bunch of touchdowns. It wasn't the most volume. He's kind of like a poor man's Kittle. And I'm not saying he's George Kittle, but he had to do it on lower volume. But when he was getting the ball, he was a first read. It was a touchdown play or it was a splash 20, 30-yard reception. He can get downfield. I think it was 14.1 yards per catch. At this ADP, all he has to do is kind of replicate what he did last year. If they decide Kraft is a special player, and I'm not worried about the other tight ends in Green Bay, they've recognized that Kraft is their main guy. I think you're getting him at his floor, and his upside is I could see him being a top 5, top 6 tight end. I like Matt LaFleur. I think he's one of the most underrated coaches in football. I got to believe last year, just the season went a certain way. They weren't really sure how healthy Love was. They didn't want to throw him into the fire. Jacobs got rolling. Defense was maybe better than expected, and so they didn't throw the ball a lot. This year, you just expect that to bounce back somewhere to the middle of the pack where there's be more passing opportunities filtered into the game. And I think Kraft can take advantage. I just think he's a splash play and a touchdown waiting to happen.
Yeah, leading the league in yak last year is not nothing, right? Like that's certainly a good stat to have as a tight end. There's not that many tight ends that are great after the catch. And I think he is. I love how much they're talking about getting him the ball too. Like he had a good season last year. You come back in this offseason, Jordan Love saying it and all the beat writers confirming it, that they are making an effort to get him the ball more. And yeah, this being a passing attack where we just don't have that like true proven number one target. Maybe it could be Matthew Golden. Maybe Jaden Reed will finally realize all of my dreams and end up being the player that I think he can be. But right now we don't know that that's going to be the case. And if they really love Kraft, like you're saying, he could be that guy. And we're constantly trying to chase. When you're going late round tight end, we're constantly trying to chase these guys that are good athletes, these guys that, can potentially be one of the top 2 targets in their offense. I always shout out a guy who, positions himself as the tight end guru, Andrew Cooper over at Fantasy Alarm. And he always talks about that. It's athleticism. And it's guys who have a chance to be one of the top 2 targets in their offense. That's what you should be looking at when you're trying to find these late round tight ends. And Kraft is like the perfect example of that. And I've said it before, but if I don't get one of those elite tight ends, this is the range when I start to look at it. And Kraft is one of the first names I'm looking at. I'm also looking at Dalton Kincaid and then the rookies, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren. That I think is the pocket to try to hit, at least for me. And then if I don't, then you're really taking your shots deep on guys like Chigakonko, who I mentioned, or potentially even like a rookie like Elijah Arroyo. But I feel sad in my draft if I don't come away with one of those tight ends from this little tier here of Kraft and Kincaid and Loveland and Warren. And then for Mason, I like that we saw him do it last year in what could be a very similar situation, right? The older running back getting hurt. He steps in, he averages over 108 scrimmage yards per game through the first 7 weeks. The beat writers have all confirmed that it's going to be 50-50, that it's not just coach speak, that, these guys are actually going to share that backfield. And I'm with you that Aaron Jones turning 31 in December, it seems so funny to treat a guy like he's old, even though he's only 31. And yet you look at the injury history that he's had over the last 4 seasons. And to his credit, he plays through most of it. But all of the injuries, there's 10 different injuries that he's had, and some of them are doubling up the same injury, but he's had so many injuries, 3 or 4 every single season. At what point does he finally break down? I think Minnesota knows that's coming. And I think they've built this team to really excel in the run game. They have this really strong offensive line now that they've upgraded. The defense was already pretty interesting. They upgrade that as well. I think JJ McCarthy is going to prove himself to be the franchise quarterback there. This is an offense that people should be investing in, and Mason is a very, very cheap way to do it. So I love both those calls, Scott.
Yeah, I'll admit it was hard for me to make a pick in this round. There's a lot of guys I like. I'm curious to hear your pitch on the running back that you selected, but you did not pick Tank Bigsby, who's interesting. You mentioned Kincaid, who has an upside. Ibuka is a very interesting player with Chris Godwin not being ready to go probably for week one. I mean, they signed Godwin to the extension, but then they signed Ibuka. They drafted Ibuka in the first round. So what does that tell you? They're hedging their bet, and he looked like a special player at Ohio State. So it's interesting how this round, some rounds it's like, oh man, I can't find anything I like. And then there's a round like this where there's like 6 or 7 guys I felt jumped out at me.
I couldn't do Ibuka. I always talk about him. I think I've talked about him like every single episode that I've done of this show. And I think I've been on now like 4 times or 5 times. Every single time I bring him up, it's just the low hanging fruit. Like I said earlier, I think he's going way earlier in drafts. I think it would be kind of shameless for me to like pick him here and talk about him again.
You can't
but
get it anymore. I kind of felt that way about Waddle, that maybe, could people still get Waddle in the 7th round? Maybe they can, maybe they can't. And I love that the way you introduce this. We're trying to give actionable advice. What's more frustrating than people set up a frame and, here's the way to beat a room that you're never going to be in. Here's a way to beat ADP that doesn't exist in your world. We're trying to avoid that. So if I did that with Waddle, I apologize. I did, I'm not trying to win this podcast. I'm trying to give people advice that they can actually take to the table and use. So I share the same ethos that you have there.
No, I think the Waddle thing works because, like we said in that range, I think the very important takeaway is just how many good receivers are available in that area of the draft, and that people should be hitting that range very, very hard trying to fill out the receiver core there. So I was happy that you brought up Waddle. I think we brought up a lot of good names. I'm going to go away from receiver, though. We've talked about receivers so much. I'm going to mention a running back, and it is J.K. Dobbins. And I know the whole thing. There was a tweet yesterday from Ben Albright, and some people got bothered by it. I don't really know why. I didn't think what he said was like that crazy. I've been saying something similar ever since Dobbins signed there, that it really seemed like, and they mentioned this, they planned to bring him in. This wasn't something that happened kind of haphazardly over the summer. They had been talking to him. They had wanted to have him in and join the team, and they got that done. So I feel like he was always part of the plan there. And it makes a lot of sense, right? They don't have a ton of depth guys that they could trust. They have RJ Harvey, who's certainly a very interesting rookie that people are excited about. I'm excited about him too, but I think it might take a little longer for him to become the player that fantasy managers want him to be. And Dobbins can step in as this veteran who they can trust in pass protection. He can be that guy, which is an area that Harvey apparently struggling with. And I hate to call people injury prone, but Dobbins is probably the closest thing to injury prone that's out there. And I think that is going to get him again this season. It's the most likely outcome, right? We're playing a game of probabilities. And when you see a guy every single year end up getting hurt and missing time and tend to miss a bunch of time, I think it's probably going to happen again in Denver. But you have a guy that came out last season and showed us he still has juice. He was the RB14 in fantasy points per game through the first 11 weeks last year, before those injuries derailed his season. I did that with the Chargers. Now he's in the Sean Payton backfield, and Sean Payton backfields tend to be pretty productive for fantasy, especially when the team is good. I think this Broncos team is solid. The defense is really strong. One of the best offensive lines in the league. Could we see Dobbins, Harvey, they're not the exact same kind of players, but could we see this tandem be kind of like the Ingram Kamara situation? I think we could. I think it could be something like that, where Dobbins comes out, he's the lead back, and then we see Harvey kind of establish himself more and more. And if that inevitable injury does come for J.K. Dobbins, that's when Harvey would take over. That's when Harvey could step up and maybe help people win their fantasy leagues down the stretch. But at the beginning of the year, to get Dobbins, the potential number 1 back on a good offense, on a good team, to get him this late in drafts, it's the kind of production I'm more than willing to take. If I can get it for half a season, if I can get it for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, I will take that in the 10th round. And then I'll figure it out after that, because you're not drafting him here to necessarily be your starter. And yet he might be one of your starters at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, Matt Harmon and I know he's had this conversation with you also, the importance of winning September, right? The importance of getting off to a good start. And you talked about drafting a player who may be in your opening lineup this late in the draft. I mean, it's just crazy to see that as an opportunity. Peyton has made it work with multiple backs before. And I wonder, I can't let this go. J.K. Dobbins was an impactful receiver. He didn't always have a ton of receptions at Ohio State, but he had a really high yards per catch, and he was really splashy in the pass game. And then he gets in the NFL, and that basically goes out the window. But Baltimore doesn't throw to their backs much. And I know last year he had some catches that didn't really pop. I wonder if Sean Payton is looking at J.K. Dobbins saying, let me get my hands on this guy, and I'll make him into a dynamic pass catcher, or at least somebody who can catch 40 or 50 balls, at least somebody who can have a decent yards per target or yards per catch. Dobbins is too young for me to give up on the player I saw at Ohio State. Now, I am a Harvey guy too, and I don't want to mask any of that. And I do think Harvey at the end of the year is going to be the ticket you're going to want to be holding. But Dobbins, the fact that Dobbins has a coordinator we like, an offense we like, and man, I am dying to have I'll see if I have the stones at the end of the preseason, Boone, to pick somebody other than the Chiefs to win this division, because I think the Broncos or the Chargers could steal it. I like both those teams. I think Kansas City has a lot of holes. I think they're vulnerable. And I know people have just gotten used to the Chiefs finding a way to win every game because the opposing team, does something stupid at the wrong time. They shouldn't have gone to the Super Bowl last year. They weren't that good. By Pythagorean, they outkicked their win total by 2 or 3 wins. And I get it, Mahomes and Reed and all that stuff. But I think they could lose this division. I think the Broncos could take it. And, Sean Payton, Jim Harbaugh, what a great division for coaches, right? And you get Pete Carroll. We'll see what he has in his final act. Chip Kelly running the offense and the Raiders. This is a really fun division. Broncos going to be a fun offense. And I just trust Sean Payton to get fantasy value out of both of his running backs. I think right now Dobbins is just mispriced in the 10th round.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we got some unfortunate news from Dobbins' former team while you were talking there. My phone just started blowing up with alerts. We found out that it is official from the team. Rashawn Slater, their very, very good tackle, suffered a torn patella tendon. He is going to be out for the season. Just a massive loss for that offense, and an offense that I've heavily invested in for fantasy this year. I think a lot of people have. I don't know, now that we know that it's for sure here, Scott, I don't know if you want to chime in any more on it. This is going to impact how I'm viewing Omarion Hampton for sure. It's going to bump him down a little bit because I think some concerns about the offensive line last year held them back. We thought that it was going to be a really good unit to start the season. They weren't quite top of the league like I thought they could be. Hampton's somebody that is going to have an opportunity to excel right out of the gate. And it's not that he can't overcome this, but I was very far ahead of some people on him, having him as my RB12 in my rankings. And now I'm certainly going to have to rethink that, maybe bump him down a couple spots.
Yeah, remember, just feel sick over the Slater news. Remember, offensive line play is more important than you might think for the running game, and it's more fixable or maskable, or you can work around it for the passing game. I'm not saying you want a bad offensive line for your quarterback, but it's so important to the running game. You just can't separate those two things. So I need to reevaluate how I feel about Hampton, who he's one of the biggest risers of this preseason, as he's just looked like he's ready to come take over on a team that wants to pound the rock, but they have to change their mindset a little bit. We'll see how they coach up the guys after him, or if they can make a trade, if they may even go looking for some options when cuts come down and stuff like that, or if some offensive lineman is unhappy in a different city. But it just breaks my heart because the player obviously impacted the most is Hampton, who you had him at RB12. I didn't have him quite that aggressively, but I felt like I was ahead of market too. And I'm lucky that I don't have the Hampton shares that I probably should have, because I'm just getting cut in front of the line a few times on that. But again, offensive line play, more important to the running game than commonly held, and you can work around it in the passing game.
Well, and wishing Slater the smoothest possible recovery, and hopefully we see him back next season and playing at the top of his game like we've seen him do already in his career. All right, 2 rounds left here, Scott. Who is your pick for round 11 as we start to kind of get towards the end here of our favorite picks in each round?
Yeah, I don't know. I know we briefly talked about the 3rd round maybe being a quarterback round, but we generally ignored that position. That's the way fantasy is, right? NFL all about the quarterback. Fantasy often isn't about the quarterback. But give me Drake Maye. I am buying everything that Mike Vrabel is selling. I am buying everything that Josh McDaniels is selling. He's one of those coaches, miscast as a head guy. You love him as a coordinator. Cliff Kingsbury, Wade Phillips, Norv Turner. Some guys just aren't meant to be in charge of everybody, but man, can they design offense. And Drake Maye kept himself above water. He stayed afloat last year with a horrible offensive line with sketchy skill talent. Now he adds Stephon Diggs. We'll see if Kyle Williams pops into anything. Demario Douglas looks excellent, by the way. He's been mispriced. I don't know where he was on this ADP chart, but I could have easily talked up Demario Douglas. But Drake Maye sneaky mobile. He had one of the most highest scramble yards. I think even first or second in the league last year. Harmon was quoting that stat. So I like the player, like the coordinator. They've improved the skill talent. They obviously drafted an offensive tackle in the first round, Campbell, the kid from LSU. Patriots are favored in the majority of their games, a team that only won 4 games last year. I'm from New England. I wasn't sure when the Patriots would have a good team again. I'm in on this team. I think they're going to go, I don't know, 8-9, 9-8. I think they'll be in the fringes of playoff contention. I think they're the second best team in this division. Certainly not anywhere close to Buffalo right now, but team on the upswing. They got the coaching right. They got the coordinator right. They got the quarterback right. And there's talent around Drake Maye. He is, when you're looking for, again, all about upside, right? Tell me somebody who can smash their ADP. Doesn't matter about the floor, because we know things could fall apart. Maybe the line stinks again. Maybe Diggs doesn't have that much left. Maybe Kyle Williams doesn't pop. Maybe there's Mario Douglas. Maybe he's got kind of a low ceiling. You can have different opinions on that. But man, there's certainly an upside for Drake Maye to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, and I know you said you don't care about the floor, that we're shooting for that upside. He did show pretty awesome floor last year, right? The 9 outings where he played at least 85% of the snaps, never finished lower than QB 17, averaged 213 passing yards, 37 rushing yards per game, threw for 14 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, rushed for another 2 scores. Really looked like he belonged. And if you take those stats from those games where he played the majority of the snaps, you put him out over a full 17-game season, it puts him right into that low-end QB1 conversation. I think he belongs there probably this year. There's so many quarterbacks that could fit that range. It's going to be so interesting to see. And I know a lot of people look at the rankings and they'll go, how come you have this guy so low? I can't believe you have Drake Maye at QB 15. Well, it gets very, very close from QB 7 or 8 all the way to deep into the teens. All those guys are pretty close. And there's a lot of guys you could go with in that range, or even grab 2 of them, even though that's not something I normally do with my teams. I normally just take a chance on one. And if it doesn't work out, I go to the waiver wire and I'll stream from that point on. But yeah, Maye is near the top of the list of those guys that could be a pure breakout candidate and maybe almost become that high end range of outcomes, but become that kind of Josh Allen talent and elevate all the weapons around him in New England and go on to have a great fantasy career. I will also say,
let me ask you really quick. I know you're a big JJ McCarthy guy. Is he higher on your ranks than Maye?
So I've flip-flopped both of them. I had McCarthy above him, and then I'll be totally transparent here. When I looked at ADPs and I saw where Maye was going and McCarthy was going, McCarthy's just going so much later that I didn't need to have him ranked over Drake Maye this year in order to get him on a ton of teams. So I flipped them back. I have McCarthy 1 spot below him. I think the ceiling for Maye is higher. But I think both these guys are going to end up being really, really good fantasy plays this season. I mean, Kevin O'Connell, and I've talked about this in the show before, and I've written about it as well in the breakouts piece that I did. And I talked about both these guys in that article. But McCarthy being attached to O'Connell and what O'Connell's done with basically every quarterback that's been there, even the backups that have gotten extended stretches as a starter in that offense. I think McCarthy is almost a lock to succeed there and to be in that conversation as a low-end QB1 or, very, very close to it, flirting with those kind of numbers. But if I had to pick between them, it probably should be Maye, because with the rushing ability that he brings, even though I think McCarthy is going to run probably more than people expect, I think young quarterbacks tend to. I've seen that over the years where it's just an easy default when they're younger and they still have the athleticism to use their legs, even if it's not necessarily their calling card. I think we'll see McCarthy do a little something there, but Drake Maye isn't going to be a Lamar Jackson, or even a Josh Allen level runner, but he's going to give you good production with his legs there. And if they found him the weapons, if some of those guys can come through in that passing attack this year, if the coaching is a little bit better, which it definitely should be, Drake Maye is somebody that could potentially swing fantasy leagues. So yeah, I think that's a great call.
Yeah, Hardy co-signed to pretty much everything you said. I would follow Kevin O'Connell into a burning building. And I just want to underscore, you mentioned noting ADP when you were thinking about your rankings here. And, it's so hipster to say, oh, I don't care about ADP. The ADP is trash. And ADP is what things cost, right? I mean, you wouldn't go into the store to buy a new computer and say, well, okay, I got $1,500. You would look at the different things and what your needs were. And, your kids going back to school, or you want a computer for home, or, for going on the road, whatever. You consider things. The price of things matters. And your market matters. And this is why when I'm in a Yahoo draft, people say, oh, yeah, I got to put my own rankings in there. I don't want these rankings. No, I want to know what my opponents are looking at. I will have a piece of scrap paper. I'll set my queue, of course, in case I get bumped offline or I need a name in a pinch. But I want to see in any draft output for that matter, but most of my drafts, of course, are on Yahoo. I'm a company guy. I want to know what my opponents are looking at. ADP matters because it's the market. And we have to try to exploit the market. We have to try to beat the market. We have to try to find inefficiencies in the market. And to do that, you have to know what the market is. So this idea that you're just going to throw ADP out because you're too cool for school, I think it's a really misguided idea.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where I won't look at it every time I'm updating my rankings, but every once in a while, you kind of have to check in and see, are you kind of way off of where guys are going? Are you, like right now, for example, not to go back to him, but Emeka Egbuka is a guy that I have, I think, way, way above, and I'm willing to take him in like the 7th or 8th round in these drafts, even though he's going much later. And you have to kind of balance what kind of league are you drafting against. If it's an analyst league, then definitely you got to take him in that range. Everybody's going to be on him. If it's a more casual league, you might be able to get away and kind of play that game of chicken and wait an extra round or two and see if you can get a little better value. But you're taking a risk at that point that there's going to be that one person in your league that loves that player just as much, and they're going to go a round or two or more ahead of ADP to try to get them. So it is a bit of a balancing act, and it's a balancing act that even analysts do, like you're mentioning.
Yeah, you have to season that. Your league better than we could. And, the leagues that Justin is in, the leagues that I'm in, they may be similar to yours. They may not be similar to yours. You may be in a league with us. Maybe you're in the fishbowl with us or something like that. But you have to season it to taste, and you have to play to the context that you're facing.
All right. I will finish us off here in round 12, and I will take a sip out of my Bills cup. And I will take a Buffalo Bill here in Keon Coleman. And Coleman led my sleepers wide receiver column that I put up today. He was the picture at the top of the article. Last year, it seemed pretty evident to me that when he showed up, he wasn't the kind of player that was going to just come in and blow the doors off and be a superstar right away. That he was going to take a little bit of time to kind of get acclimated to the pros, that he was going to need to learn how to win at this level. And I said before last season that I was expecting maybe not quite, the ceiling here, but I was expecting kind of a Rashee Rice rookie year from Coleman, where he starts very slow, he ramps up as the year goes along, and then in the second half of the year, he really starts to break out. And he showed up in week 1, the size, the ball skills, it was enough to make him a contributor right away. He posted at least 50 yards or a touchdown in 4 of his first 5 outings. And he looked like he was starting to get really comfortable around week 7 and 8. He put up 4 for 125 in week 7. He put up 5 for 70 and a touchdown in week 8. He earned 7 targets in both games. Then he suffers this wrist injury in week 9 and kind of screwed everything up for him. He's forced to miss 5 weeks. He comes back. It was kind of mediocre production when he came back after that. Now, this year, he's healthy. We're hearing about how busy he is in practice, that the connection with Josh Allen is there, that he's still a little bit inconsistent. He's still figuring out some things, but that he's getting a ton of volume in practice and he's coming down with those touchdowns now. It's great to hear. He is going to have an opportunity to really establish himself in this offense at the start of the season as well, because Khalil Shakir dealing with an injury, out 4 to 5 weeks, that really puts his week 1 status in doubt. He might not be available. And if this continues, Coleman's not the same kind of receiver by any means. He's not going to get the kind of volume that Shakir would get. But Coleman is the kind of guy that could put up double-digit touchdowns. And to get a guy like that in the 12th round, who weirdly the Bills don't have that proven true number 1 receiver, maybe Coleman could become that guy for Josh Allen, that difference maker in the passing game there. I think he's got a real shot this season to do something, and I think he's such an interesting pick in this range.
Yeah, he really is. And, the Bills as well as anybody. Somebody's going to pop here, especially with Shakir hurt. We've been spoiled with rookie receivers being so good in recent years that sometimes we miss, Keon Coleman was a basketball player when he went to college, and he came out early, and He's a taller guy. He was somebody who was raw, as you said, and was actually having, as you mentioned, a pretty good rookie year. The wrist injury just totally screws up the trajectory, which is good. It keeps his season under wraps. A lot of people are going to overlook him. There was a generation ago where we looked for receivers to pop in year 2, year 3, tight end breakout year 3. I feel like Kincaid or Coleman, at least one of those guys is going to pop. Maybe they both will. Maybe the Shakir injury will open that up. As you mentioned, Shakir is a different kind of receiver than Coleman, but obviously the opportunity swells there. But I feel like there's going to be a right answer here. Josh Allen is too good. And, last year win the MVP with a top touchdown guy was Matt Collins with 5. Obviously Allen ran for a bunch of stuff, and they kind of had a flat receiver tree. Somebody, again, it wasn't that long ago where it's like third-year tight end, get me in. Second-year receiver, get me in. Now we want everything right away because Brock Bowers and Sam Laporta and, all these receivers going back to 2014, that class where all those guys popped. And now we expect the receivers to be good right away. The college and pro games have started to merge closer together. That maybe a player like Coleman, who was always seen as a second-round pick, a little bit of a development guy, maybe he was ahead of schedule, and then he didn't have a good run out in the second half. I think people miss his trajectory. He's actually closer to being a finished product maybe than people realize, and let's give him some time to grow into the player that Josh Allen can trust. I mean, last year he is pretty good production on just 57 targets. I realized the catch rate wasn't that great, but he's going downfield 19.2 yards per catch is excellent. He can win contested. He could be a decent red zone weapon when he gets up to speed. So let's just appreciate that for all the guys who pop right away, and that's great. Most players need time to get their feet wet, to get the trust of a team, to become acclimated to full-time NFL players. And I think Kincaid or Coleman, and I'm not sure exactly what Kincaid's ADP was. It was a couple rounds earlier, maybe the Kraft round, but there's a right answer percolating in Buffalo, and maybe there's 2 right answers percolating in Buffalo.
I will say too, one of his teammates is probably somebody that we should mention in this round, and it kind of fits a bigger narrative. Ray Davis, the backup running back for the Bills. It's weird that in these late rounds, those are some of my favorite picks. Those like true backups that, you feel good about, guys that potentially could have a role, like a Jaylen Wright on the Dolphins, who could maybe do something for you, be a flex play, but then has some upside if DeVonta Achane misses time. Those are guys that I often look to late in the draft in those final rounds. We know they're one injury away. Sometimes you're not always on the right guy. Sometimes the backup ends up being someone else, but in general, if you can pinpoint a Tyler Algier, for example, that's somebody that I think we know if Bijan Robinson goes down, it's going to be Algier's backfield. Those are guys in the late rounds too that we didn't really talk about. I mentioned Dobbins, but Dobbins is a guy who has a chance to start. Those backups also, I think, are very valuable and very good targets in the late rounds.
Totally agree. And my motif has always been, I want to take your backup in August, and I'll worry about ensuring my own backfields later in the season. I think getting that number 2 behind your number 1 is a good idea around Halloween, around Thanksgiving, when you're playing to a more specific strategy. I want the big inning in August. So when when somebody else takes Cook, I want Ray Davis. When somebody else takes McCaffrey, I run Garendo. I realize in Minnesota it might be closer to a 50-50 thing, but if somebody else takes Aaron Jones, I'm going to be swooping in on Jordan Mason. That's generally what I do in August. And Ray Davis, he had a chance start last year. I think he went for like 155 or something like that against the Jets. So he looked the part. He's one of those guys, the moment he starts, where he's going to be like running back 15 on everybody's board, if not higher.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the kind of guy that I want to draft. I don't want to be fighting against people on the waiver wire to try to get, even though there's going to be plenty of waiver wire fights at some point this season. If we went any later here, if we went into the deeper rounds, we'd start to talk about those kind of names, but we're not going to do that. We have made it, Scott. I am calling it there. A reminder, though, here, we are celebrating 28 years of Yahoo Fantasy with 28 days of fantasy promotions. Today's announcement is draft recap enhancements. Yahoo Fantasy draft recaps just got even smarter, more insights on your picks and roster construction. They're now in your email and the Yahoo Fantasy app, and they're available for Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues too. You can start drafting now at yahoo.com/fantasy. That is going to do it for today's show, though. Mr. Harmon will be back. He will be in the host chair on Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern, live on YouTube. He will be providing his biggest takeaways from the preseason action that we're going to see over the weekend. Scott will also join him to share 8 different strategies to build the ideal roster this draft season. But one last time, big thanks to Scott for hanging out with me today. Big thanks to everybody out there for listening and for watching the show. Big thanks to everybody behind the scenes too. And we will see you next time. We are out.